The senior pastor sues the church, and then wait for it, and then quits. So
yeah, I get the logic here.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense, right? And this, of course, can only happen in the world of megachurchdom. And so now we travel to the beautiful Southeast in Jacksonville, Florida. Celebration Church, 12,000 member congregation, and it's everything that you think it is. Multi-campus, campuses in the United States, all over the world. Money-making juggernaut. Senior pastor Stovall, Stovall Weems. That's a great name, Stovall Weems. Love that. Okay,
Yeah.
so basically, well, actually,
So basically, this church is pulling a Florida man kind of highlight.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yes, we should put that up as a meme, right? Let me tell this backwards because the story from the web tells it first from the pastor's point of view and then from the church's. Let me tell it from the church's point of view first. The church claims that he made several questionable financial transactions. He bought a property for $850,000 and then sold it to the church for $1.2 million. Nice. Way to profit from your church. There you go.
Awesome.
Weems and his wife, once again, we talked about this before. If you want to make twice the money with no taxes, just make your wife the assistant pastor. And there you go. But for some reason, and it's not well laid out, both he and his wife took 7 to 9 months of pay advances for some reason.
Yeah, that was, I think, like, of all the things that I saw here, it's like, you're the pastor of a mega church. How can your salary not possibly be enough?
Exactly. And then finally, the other big one, and this one was my personal favorite, used money out of the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program. You know that program that exists so that struggling businesses don't have to fire people?
Oh, yeah, that one.
That one, yeah. They took $1 million of that money, and he turned around and bought cryptocurrency with it.
Yeah, because that's exactly what the Paycheck Protection Loan was all about. Yeah.
Right. And so here's the pastor's response. He feels he was wrongly ousted from his position as senior pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, really? Oh my gosh. So in my opinion, the last 7 days were a little bit of a slow news week. And
Yeah.
there's
for sure.
there's 5% of me that kind of goes to that well, what are we going to talk about this week? There's nothing interesting in the news. But like, you know how like when you go to like a work site, they always have that sign up that's like 60 days without an accident. You know, like that's the other 95% of me. Like a slow news week means that there was no major trouble in the church for this week. And part of me is actually relieved about that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So when an article like this shows up, it's actually, it's a nice teaching article because it's so to the point. It's not like abstract or hard to rip your mind around. Like it's about money and the improper use of it by people who have way too much power and way too little accountability, you know?
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with what, I mean, we've said, I think, nearly every podcast so far. And we've talked about Hillsong and we've talked about Dave Ramsey. And this is sort of just more of that same thing, but with a little twist.
Yeah.
You know, which, you know, I think the other stories didn't have, you know, because when we talk about this pastor suing the church, after, of course, him defrauding the church.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
You know, it's, you know, I'm thinking of Paul's teaching on the subject, right? Where he's, you know, chiding or harassing, whatever word you want to use there, the Corinthian church. And I can't remember if this was in 1st or 2nd Corinthians. But he's like, hey, you know, can't you judge for these matters among yourselves?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do you have to go to some pagan magistrate to adjudicate your problems with each other? Deal with it in a Christian way. And so here's a pastor of a church who clearly thought that the Bible wasn't good enough for him.
Exactly. You know, I would love to hear your opinion on this.
I have opinions.
This is very similar to me. So we live in the Chicagoland area, and there's a mega church here that is popular on all the Christian broadcasting, whether it be TV or radio, called Harvest, James McDonald's old church before he stepped down.
Yeah.
And this is a very similar story. that for years and years and years, these pastors, they don't make news for being outlandish. They seem responsible. For the most part, their teaching seems middle of the road, nothing to get too butthurt about. And then something happens.
Butthurt, great Christian word.
Okay, whatever. We're all. You're right. Hey, lame things come out the butt. So that's all I got to say about that. But then,
yeah, you're right.
But then they turn a corner and they go stark raving mad. Like, you can't hold me accountable. You can't tell me how to spend money. You can't tell me what to do with non-budgeted funds. You can't tell me I can't have an airplane. You can't tell me that I can't have a big house. And they go into this big mode of, like, they regress to being children. I want what I want, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to throw a tantrum. And I don't know when that happened, but it seems to be happening pretty regularly these days.
Oh my, yeah. I mean, we keep finding these stories, and there are, of course, other stories, right, that we're not covering here. Like, we find these things that pop up in the newsfeed. It's like, we could talk about that. Like, Hillsong, I mentioned to you before we started recording, had another pastor retire himself on account of some racist texts that he had sent.
Right.
Because it's obvious to him that the writing is on the wall for people and their shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
So, like, this kind of thing happens all over the place, and it's like, I wish I understood exactly what the mechanism here was, right? Like, I don't know if it's simply that, you have too much influence with too many people, and so you become a complete maniac.
Yeah.
Who probably, like, convinced the person that he bought that property from to sell it to him at, like, a lower price because, he's a pastor. And then he turns around and profits like the numbers you gave were like 800,000 versus 1.2 million.
Yeah.
So, like, he profited like 50% more.
Yeah.
Off of the backs of his congregants. And so it's like, I don't even know how you get to that point as a pastor of a church, because that's money you just took away from ministry.
Right.
And from the headlines I've seen about Florida people, they need ministry,
Yeah, they need Jesus, for sure.
Yeah. I got a buddy that lives in Florida, and, not to say that, the area he lives in, it's a perfectly nice area. It's like, Naperville or Elgin or something like that, right? It's not a big deal, just bloody hot,
right,
in the sun. But like, there's an area not far from his house where it's kind of like Pill Row or something,
Yeah.
Like, that's where, like, a lot of drugs come through, and, when we were driving through the neighborhood, there was a guy on a motorcycle, who looked like your typical, quote unquote outlaw biker. But unlike any other of those outlaw bikers I've ever seen, he was alone, and he had a SUV behind him with all tinted out windows that was just black on black.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, I've seen this movie. That guy is probably important and probably not to be, messed around with.
Right.
So, like, it has its problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of that, like, what could, Celebration Church, what could they have done with $400,000 that their pastor defrauded them from?
Exactly.
To help those people in the neighborhood like that get the drugs out.
Exactly. So what is it? The book of Mark. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. We've talked about how these megachurches are just big shell games of moving money around, and ultimately that money moves its way into pastors' pockets, right? And so clearly this is another pastor who sees the million different ways there are to make money, suing your church, right? But part of all this that didn't get a lot of column inches in the article was the fact that he was clearly spinning up a new business, right? So he may have had one foot out the door anyway, profiting from your church to the tune of $400,000, like, by selling it. Like, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that people would see a move that is so clearly self-serving and would have no shame in just saying, yeah, I'm going to do it. Like, like you said, just taking that money away from the congregants who gave that money in good faith, prayerfully, faithfully, taking the tenth, their tenth, and putting it towards God's purposes, and never for a minute thinking that this would be it, right? But then there's the whole thing of the pay advances.
Oh yeah.
Like so for me,
seriously,
this is a failure of the church board. Once again, in these mega churches, there are no church boards, right? These are big corporations with founders, and the founders write into their articles of incorporation that that members have no say, and boards are just there for show, right?
And that's the impression that I get, at least.
Right. But here's the thing: every church, whether it's real or just kind of eye candy, has an annual budget, right? How closely any church sticks to it is anybody's guess, but they have an annual budget. And it is the job of that fictitious board, or, that board that is in the pastor's pocket. It is their job to understand the budget and to carefully scrutinize any use of money that is outside of the regular budget. Like, nobody should have to put a special approval on paying the mortgage, or on paying the water bill, or on doing payroll and benefits and things like that. But when somebody comes to you and says, I need 7 months of advance pay, but I'm not taking leave and I don't have any special circumstance, I just need 7 months worth of money. Like, that should raise red flags everywhere. Like, everybody should be going, what in the world is going on? Like,
yeah, and wasn't like his wife like 9 months worth too, or something like that?
Yeah, exactly right.
I mean, it's both of them. I think that's what makes this even worse. It's two different people asking for a huge amount of time. A payroll advance is a sketchy thing from like a financial perspective for a company,
right,
or business, or a nonprofit of any kind, right? I mean, I spent 10 years working at a church denomination, right? And many years of that doing payroll. So it's like, yeah, a payroll advance is like, no, that's like, you need to like sacrifice 3 different goats on 3 separate evenings under a full moon, and then you can ask. So, like this, like that, these people, whoever was in charge of the church's money, thought that giving, more than half a year's worth of payroll advance out.
Yeah.
That means that that person should not pay, like pull any salary for the next 7 months.
Right.
Which I don't think that's what happened here.
I'm sure it's not. Yeah. And then finally, this $1 million of Paycheck Protection Program money to buy cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that famous stable investment cryptocurrency.
Yeah, right. That talk about good stewardship. So here,
no NFTs. What's wrong with you?
So full disclosure to the audience, my daytime gig is in IT and technology. So I'm not like super learned on cryptocurrency, but I do have a little bit of money invested in crypto, just so I can understand what's the difference between investing in crypto and investing in anything else, right? Like, you invest in a house, and for the most part, that value goes up steadily over time. Right now in this housing market, it goes up like crazy, right? If you invest in the S&P 500, you will generally, over the long term, make 7 to 8% a year. If you invest in something super safe like a savings account, you'll make a fraction of a percent, right? So I've got a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of money in crypto. And like, the theory is that it's a hedge against the stock market because it's a whole different form of currency. That's not been my experience. My experience is that crypto is no more or less volatile than the stock market is.
Oh yeah, like a lot of people I've tried to talk to about cryptocurrency will try to insist that it is a currency when like it is not.
Right.
It doesn't meet any of the standard criteria for a currency, most of which is debunked simply by its volatility. It is it's a traded commodity.
Right. The only thing that gives it value is the fact that there is a community of people who have faith in it. Right. And that's basically it. But the thing is, the thing that makes me mad here is governments generally stay way hands off of churches because of the PR and the political blowback. Like, if you were to punish a church for doing something religious, the blowback would be incredible, right? But information travels too fast in the internet age. It travels at the speed of light. And now we know of way too many churches who have not abided by their agreement to the way that you stay tax free is to stay out of politics. And and so if you're going to take $1 million of federal funds, which I have no problem with, like if you want to keep your employees employed and this is the only way to do it, that's great. But you need to pay your money back into the kitty in the form of taxes. The system needs to benefit everybody. You're going to take money from the government to keep your church alive. That's great. But then over time, you need to put money back into the system to benefit your larger community again. Keep those roads paved. Keep those ambulances moving. You benefited from the government, so now it's time for you to benefit the community.
Yeah, and I mean, in the strictest sense, right? A PPP loan is supposed to be applied toward the cost of employees, so salaries as well as benefits, and pay employer taxes that have to be paid.
Yeah.
Things like that. So, when you take that PPP loan and you use it to buy $1 million worth of, highly volatile garbage, I mean, that, you need to be able to show that you needed that much money in the first place.
Yeah.
So, over the period of the loan, if you did not have $1 million worth of payroll benefit or, payroll costs,
right,
then whatever you took that you shouldn't have gotten, you have to pay that back.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of me wonders how much of that was withdrawn from the PPP program.
Right. I know this has nothing to do with nothing, but I wonder how much of that $1 million, I wonder what that crypto is worth now. Like $25,000,
Yeah, it could have he could have bought it on a day that it was high, and that thing could have dropped down into a bucket.
Yeah,
and then the church would be out so much more. I mean, it's silly that we have to keep talking about how, pastors of big churches like this need oversight and need to have their power limited.
Absolutely. So I don't want to beat anybody down. I don't want to kick anybody when they're down. But just to sum this all up, good policy stops runaway leadership, right? If you have it as your policy that, hey, there's a regular budget and anything outside of the regular budget needs special approval, you stop all of this crazy spending dead in its tracks, right? Because the senior pastor can't just take $1 million and do whatever he wants with it. Number 2, quality leaders don't wait for red lines to be crossed, right? If you are a real leader, a real steward in your church, you don't wait for the pastor to do that. Hey, I need a jet plane. You don't wait for that moment. You shepherd him and steward him and you grow him so you understand where his boundaries are. Hey, as a church of 12,000 people, we are happy to buy you that $500,000 home. Great. You work hard. You've earned it. But we are not going to buy you the $1 million home, right? That's just good stewardship, and that's good shepherding, to be an elder board that supports and loves your pastor that way, to let them know when they're painting outside the lines.